What's good with y'all? So a little bit of a different video today. So MMA Junkie, if you guys don't know what that is, it's a big time MMA site on, they have Instagram, they have a website, everything like that. Sure, maybe they even have a Facebook, but they keep you up to date on things going on in the UFC. I use MMA Junkie as a good tool to keep me updated on any big news or anything that's going on. They're really good at keeping everyone informed as soon as possible of certain things that are going on in the MMA space. For the 30-year anniversary of the UFC, they released their top 30, as you can see right here. So we're just going to look through them real quick and see how they rank these guys. And this is the best, what they consider, I'm not sure which one of their team, but maybe their whole team got together, but who they consider as the greatest, top 30 greatest fighters of all time in the UFC. So let's take a look at this. So immediately at number 30, you can see they have Dustin Poirier. And immediately right here, this is where I'm like a little iffy, because after looking at this list, of course I've already looked at this list. There's a lot of guys that aren't on here that I would put at 30 over Dustin. I mean, regardless, it's going to be controversial because there's a lot of people who really like Dustin. There's a lot of people who really like other fighters. But I just think there are other fighters that are more deserving, in my personal opinion. But they got Dustin Poirier as the number 30th greatest MMA fighter of all time. And number 29, Frank Shamrock. I'm sure a lot of people may have this guy either higher or lower, maybe off their list because they haven't been watching, the UFC that long. But an OG of the game, you got to respect the OGs. These are the guys that paved the way, so I have no problem with this whatsoever. This is actually a little bit surprising to me. I was not expecting to see Francis Ngannou on this list, but here at number 28, we got Francis Ngannou. This is a little bit surprising because, I don't know, I just don't think he's been in the game as long to really be on this list. His resume, I mean, yeah, it has Stipe Miocic, but let's be honest, you know what I mean? That's really about it. He has a win over the greatest heavyweight of all time. He has a win over a much older, hasn't fought in a while, out of jail, Cain Velasquez, which isn't really all that impressive. He has a win over a much older Junior Dos Santos also. So I don't know how I feel about Francis Ngannou being on this list either. At number 27, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and I'm not mad at this. I see already, in the comments, you can see people talking about Rose, but I'm really not mad at this. At the end of the day, Joanna Jędrzejczyk was looking like the next Ronda Rousey. She was just so dominant of a champion for so long, and eventually you lose. And that's just what happened to Joanna. But when she was at her peak, man, she looked unbeatable, which is why Rose is so famous now. Because Joanna looked so unbeatable, and the way Rose beat her, it just blew Rose up to all new heights. So for that reason, I think I like Joanna on this list. I'm not mad about it. Number 26, Frankie Edgar, the guy I feel everyone forgets is a former UFC champion. This guy is a former UFC champion, has had some great Hall of Fame type fights in the past, more specifically against Gray Maynard. But, of course, another future Hall of Famer in the UFC. If he's not in the Hall of Fame already, he might be. I could be mistaken, but if not, he definitely will be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not mad at this one either. Tito Ortiz at number 25. So you already know Chuck Liddell's got to be somewhere on this list, which I respect. And a little story, a family member of mine actually met Tito Ortiz. He was in the military, and Tito came, I think he went to the base for, I don't know, some type of seminar or something. I don't know. But a family member of mine actually got to meet Tito Ortiz, and he said he's actually a really nice guy in person. So, and Tito is an OG also, so I'm not mad that he's on this list either. Number 24, Cain Velasquez. And yeah, I was expecting this one too. Cain Velasquez, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. I think he was considered as the greatest heavyweight of all time until Stipe Miocic came along, if I'm not mistaken. But also a legendary fighter with legendary fights. 100% deserves to be on this list. Number 23, Dominick Cruz. And yeah, this guy, he has a very unorthodox style. I know a lot of people now, a lot of new fans now, they might hate on this. They might see, I see someone right there says, how? Well, it's because Dominick Cruz was so dominant for so long. He beat all of everyone's favorite fighter back in the day. And just because he got a little older, he ended up losing fights. That doesn't matter. right? The guy was still a very, very dominant fighter. And in the way that he would fight was just so captivating because of how different it was. And no one could really emulate it. I mean, people can kind of get somewhat close to it, but no one can really emulate his style. It's very unique, very different. I do like Dominick Cruz being on this list. At number 22, we got one of the greatest female fighters of all time, Valentina Shevchenko. Of course, she should definitely be on this list. Not too much to say about this one. A very dominant champion. This was a very clear person that was going to be on this list. At number 21, Matt Hughes, one of the very, very few to conquer one of the all-time greats, George Rush St. Pierre. So definitely on this list. Also, UFC legend, Hall of Famer. Maybe, I'm sure a lot of people would have him up higher on this list, but even him being on this list, it's a good tribute, so I'm fine with it. At number 20, now this one is a little bit controversial. We got Ronda Rousey, and here is why, right? Because Ronda made history. She became the first and was the only female UFC champion at the time. And let's be real. Before the Holly Holm fight, Ronda Rousey was the greatest star in the UFC. By far, she was the greatest star in the UFC. She was in movies. She was on every magazine you can think of. People were even talking about her fucking boxing Floyd Mayweather. Of course, that didn't look good after she got knocked out to oblivion by Holly Holm. And then the same for Amanda Nunes. But, at the time, this was such a big deal. She paved the way for women's MMA in the UFC. Because Dana White used to always say he will never let women fight in the UFC. So, she, in my opinion, she deserves to be above all the other women. You can maybe put Amanda Nunes above her because she is the greatest female fighter of all time. But, Ronda Rousey is definitely a second. At number 19, we got my personal favorite fighter in the UFC, Max Bless Holloway. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little biased. I probably would have put him a little higher on this list. But good to see that my man has made the list as it is. But not only one of the best, but one of the most entertaining fighters to watch in the UFC. And there he is, the Iceman, Chuck Liddell. UFC legend, knockout king, one of the greatest knockout artists in UFC history. I'm a little bit biased towards Chuck too, because when I was younger and I was growing up and I loved Chuck Liddell. I have his book. There's I think it's an autobiography. I'm not sure, but I have his book somewhere around in here. I loved Chuck Liddell, and at the time he was definitely my favorite fighter. So at number 17, Henry Cejudo, man. He's a little low. You know what I mean? I think if he beats Aljamain Sterling, I think he's much higher on this list. But I think that loss, I think it took a toll on his ranking. I think he drops down to 17 purely because of that. Because if it wasn't for that, let's be real, if he stayed in retirement, I think he would be higher on this list for sure. At number 16, we got Mr. Pain and Nails, Mr. Hentai, whatever you want to say, the Chinaman, whatever crazy Sean Strickland thing you want to call him, whatever. But one of the greatest middleweights of all time, Israel, the last style Benir Adesanya. Also, one of my favorite fighters in the UFC to watch too. I mean, I know he isn't, a lot of people don't like him, but I like his style. You know what I mean? With the right opponent, his style is fun to watch. With someone who's going to take the fight to him, where he can actually utilize his style and counterpunch to an aggressive fighter, it's fun to watch. I'm not going to lie, I expected him to be lower on this list, but, seeing him at 16, it's not too bad. At number 15, wow, and to be honest, I was expecting Conor to be a little bit higher on this list. I know a lot of people are going to be against this and really angry, especially as of recently. He hasn't been, the former Conor McGregor that we all started to love to watch fight. But let's be real, he's the first ever to become a two-time champion simultaneously. And so that's history. So that is a little bit of a feather in his cap. And it wasn't just him doing it. It was the way he did it. That's why I thought was going to be higher on this list, just because for the same reason like Ronda Rousey, he made history and he basically made the UFC almost. I mean, the UFC was, before him, I know a lot of people probably didn't watch it, but it was still being considered the fastest growing sport in the world. So the UFC was growing, but Conor McGregor just blew it up to all new heights. So I did expect him to be higher, but I'm cool with him at 15. At number 14, we got Hoist Gracie. I didn't watch much of his fights. The one I did watch, though, was that I can't remember his opponent. It's the guy from Japan, absolute legend. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they had a fight where there was no time limit whatsoever. And the Japanese guy was able to make Hoist Gracie quit. And it was just a legendary moment. But of course, Hoist Gracie, even having that Gracie name, it's just a legendary name, a legendary fighter. And I'm sure in a lot of people's eyes, he should be much higher on this list. And in my eyes too, maybe, I'll see what other guys are on here, but maybe he deserved to be a little bit higher on this list. But a legend, man. And immediately at 13, yeah, I would put Hoist over Kamaru Usman. But, number 13, arguably one of the greatest welterweights of all time in Kamaru Usman. Another very, very, very dominant champion. But I do think, having someone like Kamaru Usman and then seeing Israel Adesanya, I think having these guys so high on this list, I don't know. I think it might be a little bit recency bias, maybe a little bit. But definitely Kamaru Usman is one of the guys that definitely deserves to be on this list for sure. And number 12, BJ Penn, Mr. getting knocked out in the street fights and all this stuff. But hey, I remember when in BJ Penn's heyday, the guy was a freaking animal. I'll never forget watching him lick that blood off of those gloves. Oh my God. That was like, watching that, it was like, something is fucking wrong with this guy. This guy is an absolute animal. And, it sucks when, these guys fight a little bit too much and they end up just constantly losing and losing and losing, or, getting themselves in trouble outside of, the octagon. It kind of tarnishes their career and makes people forget truly how great they were in their heyday. So, BJ Penn, without a doubt, deserves to be on this list, and I'm sure a lot of people would have him much higher. Randy Couture, Captain America, and even the guy Joe Rogan calls his hero. I still think, even though he's an absolute legend among legends, I don't know if I would put him this high. All respect to him. He definitely deserves to be on this list without a doubt. But I don't know. I think it's a little bit high. If you're talking about pound for pound, greatest fighters of all time. At number 10, we got the greatest heavyweight of all time, Stipe Miocic. I'm not too mad about this one. He is the greatest heavyweight of all time. So we knew he was going to be ranked somewhere high on this list. Look forward to seeing if he can possibly do the unthinkable, and that is take out Jon Jones. Now at number 9, we got the greatest featherweight of all time in Alexander Volkanovski. Extremely dominant champion. Unfortunate in his last fight, he lost in the way that he did, which is why I think he's not as high on this list. I think he would be just a little bit higher on this list if, if he was in another close fight with Islam, it would have been really good for him. But because he lost in the way that he lost, I think that maybe drops him down, 2 or 3, positions in the greatest of all time. But, it is what it is. Volk is still definitely top 10. And there she is, the greatest female fighter of all time, Amanda Lioness Nunes. And immediately I'm seeing one person say they can't really name anyone she's beat other than Holman Ronda. Well, and that's because she's dispatched the hell out of everyone. She's dispatching elite fighters, yo. She's treating them like they are nobodies, and that's why you don't know who the hell they are, because Amanda's treating them that way. She's just that good. She deserves to be on this list. If she was ranked higher, I wouldn't be surprised either. So 100% agree with this one. At number 7, Daniel Cormier at number 7. I'm not going to lie. I thought he would be ranked higher. DC beat a lot of UFC Hall of Famers, a lot of UFC legends. He has an incredible resume. And I'm not going to lie, I didn't like DC at first, but he kind of grew on me when he wins these belts and you're starting to see more of his personality and how he is. He kind of grows on you. And I think that was the same for a lot of MMA fans at the time. DC was heavily booed in his fights with Jon Jones. And then later on, he becomes a huge fan favorite that we all know and love. At number 6, Jose Aldo. I mean, I'm not mad at this one either. One of the greatest. Not only did he dominate in the UFC for so long, but also very dominant in the WEC, where in those legendary fights with Uriah Faber, man, Jose Aldo is without a doubt deserving to be on this list. He ended up losing a lot of respect just because, you know, Conor McGregor was on the rise, the extremely popular guy. A lot of people just watching the UFC and then watching him get his lights put out. And then after that, Jose Aldo just hasn't really been all the same. So it's unfortunate that I just don't think he gets the recognition that he really deserves. So good to see that he is somewhat high on this list. That'll maybe make people, you know, do their history a little bit and look at his background and his resume. And just real quick, I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised. This reminds me, I'm not surprised Renan Barão isn't on this list. If you guys don't remember, Renan Barão was, you know, pound for pound #1 fighter in the world at the time. Super dominant champion. You know, he goes out there and loses to a very young, unexpected TJ Dillashaw that just came out of freaking nowhere. But Renan Barão at the time, very similar to Jose Aldo, just absolutely dominant, just unstoppable. So I'm surprised Renan Barão isn't really on this list. Maybe a lot of people just have forgotten him or something. I'm not sure. But that guy was a monster in his heyday. Ooh, now this one is gonna make people a little bit angry. Khabib Nurmagomedov at number 5. He is the most dominant champion, the most dominant fighter we have ever seen, without a doubt. I think what holds him back is his resume and the fact that he retired so soon. It's unfortunate because he did have the potential to be the greatest of all time, undoubtedly. But the resume just isn't there compared to all these other guys. But because of his dominance, I probably would have ranked, in my opinion, I probably would have ranked him a little bit higher than this. But as I said, it is going to be his past opponents are what hold him back from the glory of being the greatest of all time. At number 4, Anderson the Spider Silva. 100% agree with this. Perfectly fine with this. I'm good where he's at. To be honest, a lot of people would even have him at number 1, which I wouldn't be against either. As long as Anderson Silva, a lot of these guys, I wouldn't really care where you put them, mix and match them. You know, as long as they are in the top 5, I think it's very, very deserving. But growing up watching Anderson Silva was an absolute treat to watch. He was my older brother Antonio's favorite fighter by far. You know, he's one of those guys where, you know, my family, we all wanted him to lose just to see him lose. Of course, my brother Antonio definitely didn't want him to lose, cheered on him every fight, because my family were big on rooting for the underdog. So I remember growing up always rooting for his opponents, and he goes out there and destroys them or knocks them out cold. But, you know, always a fun fighter to watch. We loved watching Anderson Silva. At number 3, we got Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson, which I'm not going to lie, I think I would have Anderson Silva above Demetrius Johnson, just purely based on the competition and their resume. But Demetrius Johnson, just like Amanda Nunes, another one of those guys who went out there and, you know, a lot of people might say, well, I don't know half the people who, or I don't know 90% of the people who he's fought. Well, it's because he made them nobodies. You know what I mean? He beat them so badly, so easily that, you know, you just didn't remember who they were. You just don't know their name because he just bashed them so easily. You know, a very dominant champion, one of the best of all times, hands down. But I do think a lot of people also would have him at number 1, but I do think, you know, I would have Anderson Silva and maybe Khabib Nurmagomedov over Demetrius Johnson, just in my personal opinion. And now this probably was unexpected. So I'm assuming you guys probably know who number 1 is. But this, Jon Jones at number 2. And I think when it comes to these guys, of course, if I flip over to number 1, you see who it is. George Rush St. Pierre. But let's go back. You know, I think when it comes to deciding who the greatest of all time is, I think everyone really debates. The main debate is Jon Jones and George St. Pierre. So you just got to factor in, right? Jon Jones is technically the undefeated fighter. There's fights out there that he maybe should have lost that the judges got a little bit wrong, but, you know, undefeated, has never been beaten. Whereas George St. Pierre has. But then also, from George St. Pierre, you get the argument that he was a clean fighter. Jones, not very a clean fighter. Plus, let's be real. When it comes to deciding, you know, everything, the outside factors and everything like that, they do come into effect. They do matter a little bit. So let's be real. George St. Pierre has the cleanest past. whereas Jon Jones has probably one of the worst pasts in MMA history. So that's why I'm not too mad at it. I'm not going to lie, me personally, I probably would have Jones at number 1, but I can easily see the argument for having Jones at number 2. But of course, they got George Rush St. Pierre at number 1, pound for pound, greatest MMA fighter of all time. Let me know what you think about this list. Let me know if there's anyone you think they're forgetting, anyone you would put on this list. There's a lot of big names out there. Tony Ferguson is the first one, big one that comes to mind. Possibly even Anthony Showtime Pettis also comes to mind. Yeah, a lot of people have forgotten him and lost his name, but Showtime became the first person ever on first MMA fighter ever on a Wheaties box. So Showtime made history too. There's a lot of guys out there that they could have added to this list instead of some other people, in my opinion. But I'm interested to see what you all think. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thank you all so much for the support, and I'll catch you in the next video.